Well, we're now being joined by, yes, you just saw the introduction there, Senator Sabi Abdullahi, who is the sponsor of the hate speech bill. He's also the Deputy Chief Whip in the Senate. Distinguished, you're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you, Mark, for having me. A pleasure to be here again.
I know that on Sunday, the story broke that you are now saying that you're going to remove the death penalty option. It's a punishment in the bill that you say that a lot of Nigerians now agree that there is a need to have the bill, but they seem to quarrel with the fact that the penalty seems to be too steep. I was a little curious as to how you arrived at that conclusion that a lot of Nigerians now agree that there is a need for a hate speech law, so to speak.
Well, I think maybe you've paraphrased what I said. I said Nigerians have agreed that there is a problem of hate speech. That is what I said.
Okay.
And so the issue of agreement, I think, will come at the end of the day because the engagement process of, the bill is still on. And I believe the beauty of democracy is that we're able to engage, we're able to have a conversation, and we're able to talk through the issues, whether good or bad. And at the end of the day, if there's a consensus, I think there will be room for actions. And that is what the bill process provides for us as legislators. You introduce a bill, of course, there is a debate, it goes on up to the public hearing, and at the end of the day, even when you come back, before it is read the third time and passed, the clause by clause is also debated. And all of these are opportunities for us to fine-tune whatever bill any senator or any member brings, so that at the end of the day, the various perspectives that define who we are as a country will be taken into consideration in the course of passing the bill.
I know that you sponsored this bill in the 8th Assembly, and as a result of the backlash the National Assembly got, particularly the Senate, it was thrown out. Yet you brought it up again in the 9th Assembly. Why do you think that it's going to pass this time around? Or why are you so persistent with your proposal of this bill?
The issue is, I think you've gotten something wrong. The bill was never thrown out at any point. What happened in the 8th Assembly was, when I introduced the bill for first reading, I was preparing to engage, to take it to the second reading. But unfortunately, the political atmosphere became charged, and I reckon, based on my own assessment, that if I bring the bill, it will be politicized. And my interest was not the politicization of the bill. I rather saw it as a problem. And that the problem is so glaring, is so clear, that I believe it is something that should receive our attention. So I decided not to take any further action. Of course, by the effluxion of time of the 8th Senate, that bill expired with the 8th Senate. Now, I'm privileged to be back in the 9th Senate, and I felt I'm still strongly convinced that the problem of hate speech is one that Nigeria must tackle. Because from what I have studied, both from a lot of scholarship that has gone on the subject of violence in this country, there is a conclusion that almost all the violence are preceded by hate speech. Yes, there is a contending issue. There may be a crisis between two people or between some groups and another group. But what will lead to violence in that atmosphere is that somebody had said something that is inciting to violence due to the problem that is already on ground. And that is the point at which people who are innocent, who don't even know what is happening, will fall victims, end up losing their life, end up losing the whole of their livelihood. Many houses get burnt. Some people lose their shops. Some people lose their husbands. Some people lose their wives. Some people lose their children for no just cause, simply because somebody somewhere is irresponsible enough to incite other people to that violence. And so for me,
yes,
what I have seen, for example, I saw a statistics that says in 2017 alone, there was more than 1,500 deaths of Nigerians as a result of what? Violence. And the study I've also seen...
Not as a result of hate speech.
Yes, but I've told you one point. What is the cause of the violence? Hate speech is at the root of it.
The problem is this.
And so for me, you see, I'm not talking about sentiment here. I'm not talking about my emotions here. I'm talking about fact of the matter. And this is based on scholarship. People who have studied this violence over the years, they've come to that grave conclusion that unfortunately, ethnic and religious issue, for example, are the major fault lines. And on the basis of these fault lines, when there is disagreement between two people, they invoke that, incite other people. You see, when we talk about hate speech, the issue of incitement comes in. It must have been incited. Somebody must have said something that will spur the other person to feel.
Indeed, distinguished, there have been instances where people have said things that have pushed people to violence. And yes, I mean, of course, even though some people might not agree, but I think that if you were to do a poll, majority of people will tell you that indeed there could be something termed as hate speech. However, they are wondering whether this is the cure for it. If we say that it is such a big problem in our society, that it has caused people or pushed people to commit violence, and that it has, you know, caused other people to kill people as a result of it, the question is whether we still have room in our laws, or whether we have used the tools in our law to even prosecute the people who committed this act of incitement, for us to now say that what we have done was not sufficient, for us now say we need sterner measures or something more, you know, focused, such as a hate speech bill. That's where the quarrel seems to be.
Well, the issue is simple. When you have a problem that you have used a common solution to solve, you keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you are not getting different results. What do you do?
I want to beg you for an instance. I want something more practical.
That's what you see, you've asked a question.
Yes.
So let me just explain myself. I know I've listened to people who said the criminal code in the South, the penal code in the North have made provisions. I've listened to people who said the Cyber Crime Act has made provision. I've listened to people who said even the INEC bill, or the INEC, the Electoral Act, made provisions. But the question is, these problems are there. And so the intendment of the bill is not the issue of the prosecution. It's actually to have a framework for action, so that at the end of the day, those flash areas will give room for engagement by people who have been so focally empowered to do so. This is the intendment of the bill. It's rather unfortunate that I understand, and I understand that very rightly, because we're in a democracy and people have every right to express both their fears, their hopes, and whatever when a subject matter like this is placed before them. But the point I want to give, and the assurance I want to give, is that I have looked at all of these things, and I'm not doing what I'm doing just from my gut feeling. No. I'm using empirical fact to address these issues. And I will also say, with respect to the issue of definitions, there are a lot of materials that give credence to what we're trying to do, to show that you can tease these things out, because when you talk about hate speech, you are talking about the extreme end of a social problem. And it is at that extreme end that you must take measure. Because if you don't take measure at that extreme end, it will just take one event to plunge the entire country into crisis.
Let me ask
and
you
I think
this.
That is what responsible leaders will not allow to happen.
Let me take you up on this just quickly before we go to Lagos. I was speaking with Senator Enaya Abaribe, who is very strongly opposed to the bill, because he says that in this, talking about the political environment, he believes that the political environment is not favorable to people to even express themselves, that if such a bill is passed, I hope I'm paraphrasing him right, if such a bill is passed, it will even empower even more strongly those who are currently preventing people from speaking, to have more tools in the arsenal. And I brought up the issue of, what happened in the Southeast, agitations in the Southeast, and also, some vituperations also in the north of the country, where people asked people to leave their own area, so to speak, which some people might interpret as hate speech or something that was incited, so to speak. Now, he said that as the laws currently stand, there is sufficient room for people who caused a scenario where people felt unsafe to be prosecuted. But that never happened because there was no political will. How do you hope that your bill, or if it's passed into law, will make a difference to the political environment such that it is not subject to political whims and caprices?
Well, the provision we're having is that the body to be created will be an independent body. And I know people will question how independent. But the question is, you have to make provisions. Here, in the provision of the bill, we are saying this body is not going to be answerable to any authority.
But it's going to be appointed by the president?
No, it's going to be appointed through a process. The National Council of State, we have to agree on who is going to be appointed. And even the person who is going to be appointed, the provision is such that that person must never have any alignment to a political party. And there are so many Nigerians, very respectable Nigerians, very honorable Nigerians, very distinguished Nigerians who do not have any alignment to any political party. They are beautiful Nigerians, wonderful Nigerians who just want to see Nigeria works. And those kind of people are so many, and they can be appointed. Now, the other aspect is that they must not also serve as religious or ethnic promoters, jingoists, people who will get up and begin to talk about just one ethnicity, who want to talk about Nigeria. And at the end of the day, all of these things are provided in such a manner, at the end of the day, this will also be brought to the National Assembly for approval. The whole intendment is to make sure that only the right people who can deliver on the object and intention of this particular bill are appointed to serve. Now, let me take you away from this, just to
I'm sorry, I have to cut you short. Let's quickly go to Lagos and take questions. You can add, your thoughts to what it is that they ask you. Gentlemen.
Yes, I'd like to ask the Senator Abdullahi, one of the things that you have recommended, that you have also talked about, is that there's going to be an anti-hate speech commission. You know, some would argue that since, as you have also made reference, that there are certain laws that we already have in Nigeria that cover a significant number of issues that have been raised by this hate speech bill that you are proposing. Doesn't this bill then underscore the fact that our institutions are weak and consequently unable to tackle the issues head on, and that this proposition that you are making, this commission that you are proposing, would also fall under those weak institutions over time?
Well, I don't think so, because the issue here is that weakness can be viewed from many perspectives. And let me give you a classical example. INEC, which has provision under the Electoral Act to say that politicians should not involve in hate speech and all these things, INEC does not have the capacity, because as at the last count, even the, what did they call it, the cases they have in court dealing with the election itself is so grave that they are already overwhelmed. And so the question is, must INEC be an all-inclusive thing where they will be the ones to deal with people who, who violate the electoral process, people who engage in hate speech, leading to maybe violence and the like? INEC cannot handle that. And so what I have seen is that the various provisions we are talking about were generalist in nature. And what this bill tackles, is trying to tackle is something specific, so that at the end of the day, we can get to the root of it. And this specific thing might appear very cursory or might appear very subjective to people, but the objective reality about its end product is the fact that there is violence. Because like I have said earlier, studies, countless studies for that matter, have confirmed very clearly that hate speech precedes most violence, because the violence we witness in Nigeria are along the fault lines of ethnicity and religious intolerance. And so within this context, and you can add other dimensions, because even the gender issue is there, some regional issues are there, but then these are the key fault lines. And so within this context, the intendment of this bill is to see what can even be done through the instrumentality of putting this commission to make sure that all these flashpoint areas are engaged, so that, and that is why, if you, even from the opening, submissions I see from your station, is saying to advise government on all of these issues. Now, many of the crises between groups, either in a state or even between one state and another, these issues have been there and nothing is happening to them. Yet, when violence comes, it does not select where you come from. It does not select where you pray. It does not select who you pray to. What it does is it takes innocent life. And there are people who are, silent victims. They are being harassed. And this bill is also talking about victimization. And I'm aware victimization along the line of ethnicity, along the line of religion and other, divides are also abound in our workplaces. And so all of these issues is to get closure so that Nigerians who are suffering in silence, these issues can be brought up, and where there is need to bring in proper policy, we have people who are saddled with this responsibility to look at this matter and advise government appropriately.
Senator Abdullahi, just one more thing. Earlier on, you mentioned...
Now, when you say...
Pardon me. Earlier
Okay.
on, you mentioned that you stepped down this bill in the 8th Assembly because of a political atmosphere. So the question is, would you be willing to withdraw this bill if it becomes apparent to you that perhaps based on consultation and what Nigerians are saying, that there is no need for that bill, seeing the atmosphere that a lot of Nigerians are not exactly excited about this bill? So would you be willing to withdraw this bill?
Well, first, let me correct an impression. I never stepped it down, because stepping down a bill is a process, and I never did that in the 8th Senate. What I said is I left the bill without touching or without taking the next legislative action. And so with the expiration of the tenure of the 8th Senate, of course, it lapsed. So I need to make that clarification. Now, I'm very convinced about what I'm saying. And so I'm taking this forward, hoping that people of good conscience who really care about the kind of violence that have been happening in this country, we look at this bill beyond the sentiments they are exposing, so that together, where there are weaknesses on the bill, they can bring in their own ideas. That is the beauty of democracy, so that collectively we can solve this problem. Now, let me also say very clearly, if you have not been a victim of the violence I'm talking about, which are ethnic induced, which are religious induced, I'm sure perhaps you may not understand the points we are making. But for Nigerians who are out there, who are victims of what I'm saying, I want to submit very clearly that they understand the import of what I'm saying, and they have given their support for it, because in the same manner that I have people who are criticizing, let me make it very clear that I have so many people who have also called me or sent me messages of support as far as this subject matter is concerned. I know people will say it's contentious issue, but then we have to be bold and courageous enough to tackle this problem as a country, so that Nigerians' unity can be properly put in place. All of us will feel a sense of belonging. And I'm submitting very clearly that it is not enough for us to say, because there are one or two concerns, we should throw everything away.
I was going to ask you whether you felt this was the time, though. I mean, I think following Kayode's question, because right now there are huge fears around people's right to speak being abridged. Let us put in context what is happening to Omoyele Sowore, who talked about revolution now. He has since been released by the courts on bail, met his bail conditions, he's not been released. And people are talking about the social media bill, which just came out to light that, seems to be half plagiarized. And now a hate speech bill as well. People are saying, is this the right atmosphere? It seems that there is a strong effort to try and abridge the rights of Nigerians to free speech.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, I will never support anything that breach free speech. But let me make it very clear. The Nigerian Constitution that gave the same free speech also said in Section 45, there are conditions under which derogation can take place. And I think we need to be very careful. What I have said very clearly is, it's not about the hate speech. It's about the action that comes in following hate speech. That is the concern. And in all of these, people who make this statement do not have control when the mob comes around. And like I said, those people who are killed, are they not Nigerians? Those innocent souls that are lost, are they not Nigerians? Don't they have the same right? Dead men do not have right, because when you are dead, you can't be talking about speaking. You need to be alive to enjoy those rights that we are talking about. And I'm saying that the violence that is occasioned by these hate-induced intolerances are too much for us to just overlook.
We wish we had more time to speak with Senator Sabi Abdullahi, but we're totally out of time. We have to thank you for coming on Sunrise Early this morning. Senator Sabi Abdullahi Aliyu is the Deputy Chief Whip of the Nigerian Senate and also the sponsor of the hate speech bill. Sunrise Daily continues in a moment. Please stay with us.
And just before we go, let's put in some of the messages that you have sent as feedback to today's program. We'll begin with Anthony and Anthony at Odige, who says, please, why not a bill on corrupt political office holders and elected politicians with death penalty? That's the first one there.
Well, this next one is from Terzungwe Dugeri. Says, kindly ask the distinguished senator if the killings of 2018 by herdsmen militia was incited by hate speech. It is wrong to spoon on related data to achieve his motives. I believe that question actually came up, but that's what you have from Terzungwe Dugeri.
And Eichmann says, was there any punitive measure put to checkmate recurrence? He should give us facts where hate speech has caused deaths of so many in Nigeria and where political thuggery has not.
From Spartan says, the number of people against the hate speech and social media bills are more than folks amenable to it.
Next is from Godwin Agbo, says, do you think hate speech is the root cause of insecurities we're facing? That's a question. Why the bill? Why not the bill that will help government own up? Why not bill that will help the political positions less attractive? You see suggestions coming in here and there.
And let's take this one from Ayo. Says, corruption, terrorism, unemployment, poverty, political and religious crisis have done more harm than the so-called hate speech.
Final note, we take this mail from, I believe this is from Olasheni Bello, says, dear presenters, the idea of a sexual offenders register is a good step in the right direction. However, a register is also necessary for the treasury looters. The terrible role of the treasury looters is the reason Nigeria is backward today, but because it affects the political office holders, stakeholders, and leaders at various levels in government. That mail goes on, but I think the idea has been gotten. Let's just register.
Well, there's so many things that we'll be able to look at, but then that's where we can call it a wrap this morning. Well, we understand that, of course, that conversation on ASU and IPs and the federal government is in the it's really burning, and we hope to be able to engage the leaders of ASU tomorrow. In the meantime, that's how much we can take today. Thank you very much for being a part of the program. I'm Ayo Makinde.
And I am Kayode Okikiolu.
Thank you. I'm Maukwe Ogun Yusuf.